The sun of Aridian 9 hung like a molten disk in a sky streaked with ochre and copper. Elias Ward stumbled across the dunes, each step sucking the strength from his legs. His water reserves were nearly gone, and his throat felt like sandpaper. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of scorching rock and fine dust, punctuated by jagged mineral outcrops that reflected the sun in blinding flashes. Behind him, faint silhouettes shimmered on the horizon, Solari observers, tall and luminous, their skin glinting like polished crystal. They had been watching him for hours, silent, analytical. Elias knew their species thrived on scarcity. Every drop of water was accounted for, every gesture calculated. To them, a human wandering alone in a desert was an anomaly, perhaps an inconvenience. Elias collapsed to one knee, scanning the surroundings. Survival wasn't just a matter of endurance, it was adaptation. He crouched behind a low ridge, brushing away grit to reveal a shallow crevice in the rock. Small pools of condensed moisture clung to the stones. Carefully, he collected them in a makeshift vessel, sipping sparingly, feeling a faint spark of relief. From above, a Solari voice crackled through an intercom-like device. "Should we provide assistance?" Elias froze. The question was loaded. To accept aid could jeopardize his position as an observer of alien behavior, yet refusal risked collapse before he could act. He hesitated, then called out in measured tones, "I require water, but I can ration. I am not here to endanger your people." There was a pause, then the voice replied, tinged with uncertainty. "We have never shared water with a human. This could be catastrophic." "I understand your concern," Elias said, steadying himself. "But observe, a single human, with guidance, can survive without depleting your reserves excessively. You will not regret cautious aid." A group of younger Solari approached cautiously, their translucent bodies glinting under the harsh sun. One stepped forward, eyes wide and curious. "Your species, you survive under extreme conditions?" Elias allowed himself a faint nod. "We adapt. Survival is not just biology, it's ingenuity. We find ways to turn scarcity into opportunity." The eldest among them, a tall Solari named Chancellor Sealer, stepped forward, his posture rigid, authority radiating from every movement. "You speak confidently," Sealer said. "Yet you are weak. One day without water could end you. Why should we trust your words?" Elias met his gaze evenly. "Because actions speak louder than words. Allow me to demonstrate. One ration, carefully administered, will sustain me. Observe my methods, and you will learn how humans approach survival differently from any species you know." Sealer considered this, his crystalline features unreadable. After a long moment, he gestured, and a small supply of water was released to Elias through a narrow conduit. He drank cautiously, savoring each drop, then began his work. First, he examined the mineral-rich sand, identifying areas where condensation naturally gathered during the cooler nights. Using flat stones as reflectors, he accelerated dew formation. Slowly, he filled a small reservoir, conserving the precious liquid. Every movement was deliberate, precise, a demonstration of observation turned into action. A Solari student whispered to a companion, astonished. "He calculates, he predicts, it is like watching the desert bend to his will." Elias overheard but did not break focus. "Humans think ahead," he said softly. "We anticipate, we analyze. Survival is understanding both limits and possibilities. Water is not merely consumed, it is optimized." Sealer's expression tightened, pride warring with curiosity. "Perhaps your words carry more weight than I expected. Yet one human cannot change centuries of scarcity." "Perhaps not," Elias said, still crouched over his reservoir. "But one human can demonstrate principles that transform understanding. Observation reveals patterns invisible to those bound by convention." Hours passed. Elias moved from one crevice to another, demonstrating subtle techniques, collecting moisture from mineral deposits, using reflective surfaces to condense night humidity, and channeling small streams into shallow basins. Every technique was precise, rooted in both instinct and logic, and every movement drew astonished murmurs from the observing Solari. Finally, as the twin suns began their descent, Elias settled in a shaded hollow. He measured the water collected, carefully noting efficiency and output. "You see," he said to the Solari, "even under extreme conditions, principles of observation, adaptation, and calculated action can extend survival far beyond expected limits. Scarcity is not absolute, it is a challenge to intelligence." Sealer's eyes narrowed, but for the first time, his rigid pride wavered. He looked at his younger council members, noting the fascination in their expressions. The human, small and seemingly fragile, had not merely survived, he had taught, demonstrated, and challenged every assumption they held about biology and survival. A Solari student stepped closer, voice trembling with awe. "Sir, how do you endure? Your body, your species." Elias allowed himself a faint smile. "We endure because we must, and because we refuse to be defined by limitations. Every challenge is an opportunity to adapt. Every scarcity invites ingenuity. That is the difference." Sealer finally spoke, his tone measured but carrying a reluctant acknowledgement. "Very well. You may continue. But know this, human survival is an anomaly. If you fail, the consequences will be severe." Elias nodded. "I accept the parameters. But I will demonstrate that humanity's strength is not always measured by brute force. Sometimes, resilience and intellect are the most potent tools of survival." As night fell over Aridion 9, the twin moons casting pale light across the dunes, Elias crouched in the desert hollow, carefully rationing his newly collected water. The Solari stood silently at a distance, watching, recording, and slowly beginning to question their assumptions. The first phase was complete. Survival had been achieved, curiosity had been piqued, and a bridge between human ingenuity and alien understanding had been formed. Tomorrow, Elias would push further, revealing the depth of human adaptability, and perhaps show the Solari that their centuries-long drought might finally have a solution. The morning sun rose pale over Aridion 9, dust swirling faintly around the jagged ridges. Elias Ward stood at the edge of the hollow, surveying the desert with calm precision. Overnight he had rationed the small pool of water carefully, conserving every drop. The Solari had observed silently, their presence no longer threatening but cautiously attentive. Chancellor Sealer approached first, his tall, crystalline frame glinting in the weak sunlight. "Human," he said, voice measured. "You survived. That is, unexpected. Explain the method behind your endurance." Elias crouched, touching the sand lightly. "Survival relies on observation, prediction, and calculated adaptation. Water is not simply consumed, it is managed, optimized, and sometimes created where none is visible. Let me demonstrate." He led them to a shallow depression between two mineral spires. With deliberate movements, he rearranged stones to catch faint morning condensation. Using thin reflective sheets scavenged from his pack, he redirected sunlight to accelerate evaporation in the crevices, condensing vapor into shallow pools. Within minutes, a small but significant amount of water gathered. A young Solari student gasped. It works! He produces water where none should exist." "Yes," Elias said, voice calm. "The desert obeys laws, but laws are predictable. Observation reveals patterns. Humans exploit these patterns to survive, not just endure." Sealer's eyes narrowed. "Patterns? You suggest that one human can manipulate an entire ecosystem's scarce resources?" "Not manipulate," Elias corrected. "Understand, anticipate, and optimize. The ecosystem already functions. We merely align our actions with its natural rhythm. Scarcity is a challenge, not a sentence." The council murmured among themselves. Younger members nodded in fascination, while the older advisors exchanged worried glances. The idea that humans could influence survival outcomes without altering the environment fundamentally was alien to them. One student asked cautiously, "Sir, how do you maintain your body? You drink so little yet survive?" Elias smiled faintly. "Efficiency, awareness, and careful rationing. The human body adapts to extremes by conserving energy and utilizing minimal resources intelligently. We are designed to endure conditions far harsher than this desert. But intellect, strategy, ensures we survive comfortably, not merely barely. Sealer's pride bristled, but he remained silent. After centuries of drought, he had never witnessed such calm control over a hostile environment. His advisors whispered that the human's presence was disrupting traditional knowledge, questioning long-held doctrines about scarcity and survival. Elias moved to another ridge, demonstrating the use of mineral filters to purify sparse water, then channeling it to small basins. The Solari watched silently, noting every technique. Even minor adjustments, tilting a stone by a few degrees, redirecting sunlight by centimeters, yielded measurable increases in collected water. Precision, calculation, adaptation, whispered a student. It is genius. Elias glanced at them, tone patient. Genius is merely careful observation and deliberate action. Any species could achieve similar outcomes if it learned to anticipate patterns rather than react blindly. Sealer finally spoke, voice firm but laced with reluctant curiosity. If humans can endure this, perhaps your species' principles of survival are undervalued. Yet, what guarantee exists that these methods scale to our society? One human does not an ecosystem save. You are correct, Elias admitted. Scale requires collaboration, system integration, and understanding. But the principles remain identical. Humans optimize resources, analyze feedback, and adjust continually. Applied at scale, scarcity ceases to be absolute. Systems adapt because people adapt. The Solari Council exchanged uneasy glances. Younger members scribbled notes furiously. Their assumptions about their planet's limits were cracking. Hours passed. Elias continued his demonstration, building shallow canals to channel condensation, rigging reflective surfaces to amplify water collection, and teaching the Solari to read micro-patterns in the sand that indicated moisture retention. Each success produced small pools, growing larger with every iteration. A conservative advisor muttered to Sealer, "This human, he changes our understanding. It is unsettling. Our ancestors never questioned scarcity." "Yes," Sealer replied, voice tight. "And yet, we must acknowledge results. If his methods are valid, our people could survive, and thrive, where before we barely endured." Viral, a young Solari scholar, stepped forward, voice eager. "Sir, could these methods truly end the drought? Could they sustain our planet?" Elias nodded. "The drought is not inevitable. It is the product of rigid thinking and unoptimized systems. Adjust the approach, integrate observation and calculation, and scarcity becomes manageable. Water exists in abundance, it only requires insight to capture it efficiently." Sealer hesitated, pride warring with logic. The Solari had spent centuries conserving every drop, believing scarcity was eternal. And yet, before his eyes, a human had gathered water from near nothing, simply by observing patterns, predicting results, and optimizing technique. The younger council members whispered urgently among themselves. "If this is true, we could expand irrigation, reclaim wastelands, end centuries of famine." Elias' gaze swept across the dunes. "It is not magic. It is science, observation, and adaptability. Humans survive where others fail because we anticipate, innovate, and remain flexible. That is what your planet needs, not obedience, but comprehension." Sealer finally straightened, voice measured but grudging. "Then you will continue. Demonstrate to us, show how human ingenuity can preserve life where traditional methods falter." Elias allowed a faint smile. "With your cooperation, the results will be undeniable. Observe, record, and integrate. Scarcity is a problem of perspective, not inevitability." As the twin suns rose higher, casting stark shadows across the dunes, the Solari began replicating Elias' techniques under his guidance. They moved reflective surfaces, monitored basins, and measured condensation. Slowly, small pools became streams, streams became reservoirs. Every step was a revelation. Humans had not only survived, they were teaching a civilization how to rethink survival itself. By midday, the desert floor was subtly transformed. Shallow water channels gleamed in the sunlight, and small collections of moisture hinted at a future the Solari had never imagined. For the first time in centuries, they glimpsed hope that drought was not eternal, that scarcity could be challenged and overcome. Elias crouched by a small pool, drinking sparingly and observing their reactions. The council, once rigid and skeptical, now buzzed with questions, debate, and cautious experimentation. The human had survived. The human had taught. And slowly, the Solari began to see that humanity's ingenuity, quiet, patient, and relentless, might change the fate of their world forever. The twin suns of Aridion 9 beat down relentlessly, but the desert no longer seemed as inhospitable. Small pools glistened across the dunes, channels of water trickling into shallow basins, and reflective arrays scattered strategically across ridges captured every drop of condensation. Elias Ward stood at the center, calm and observant, while the Solari worked diligently around him, their movements precise but filled with an unaccustomed energy, a mix of curiosity, awe, and hope. Chancellor Sealer approached, his crystalline frame reflecting the harsh sunlight. "Human," he said carefully, "your methods have altered our perspective. The pools, the channels, even our irrigation systems could never have produced this efficiency. Yet I remain cautious. Can this scale to sustain all Solari?" Elias nodded. "It can, if implemented systematically. The principles remain the same: observation, pattern recognition, and adaptation. Scarcity is not a law of the universe, only a symptom of unoptimized systems. With proper distribution, your people will have abundant water, not merely enough to survive." A young Solari scholar, virile, stepped forward eagerly. "Sir, then our generations of drought could end. The wastelands could bloom?" "Yes," Elias said, his voice calm but resolute. "But it requires commitment. You must replicate these methods across the planet, adjust systems in real time, and integrate observation into every decision. Humans survive by analyzing, adapting, and acting efficiently. If your society adopts the same principles, scarcity becomes temporary." Sealer's pride wavered, though his features remained composed. "For centuries, we assumed drought was inevitable. And yet, a single human has demonstrated otherwise. It is humbling." Elias allowed a faint smile. "Humility is essential in any civilization. Knowledge is only useful when applied wisely. Your people have talent, insight, and potential, but it took an outside perspective to show you a new path. Now it is up to you to carry it forward." The Solari Council moved into action. Pools were expanded, shallow channels extended, and reflective surfaces multiplied. They tested Elias' methods, monitored moisture collection, and compared results with their traditional irrigation systems. The differences were staggering: water collected in ways previously deemed impossible, efficiency increased tenfold, and wastelands began to sustain small vegetation patches within hours. One elder advisor whispered, awestruck, "We underestimated the human species, their ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability. We may have overlooked our greatest teacher." Elias observed quietly, making small adjustments to optimize flow and placement. "Observe patterns, not just quantities. Ecosystems respond to balance, not brute force. Efficient water management relies on harmony with natural cycles. Humans survive because we anticipate, predict, and adapt to feedback continuously." Sealer stepped closer, his crystalline eyes reflecting both pride and disbelief. "If these techniques are applied across Aridion, your methods could end our drought permanently." "Yes," Elias said, voice steady. "But it is not my doing, it is yours. You have the tools, knowledge, and now experience. Humans provided a demonstration. Solari will complete the transformation." As the day wore on, the desert began to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. Tiny vegetation sprouts pushed through arid soil where none had grown for centuries. Shallow watercourses glistened under the twin suns, forming a network that could feed small communities. Birds, once rare on the barren planet, fluttered into the emerging habitats, curious and hungry. Viral knelt beside Elias, marveling at the growth. Sir, it is incredible. Your presence alone has changed everything. How can one species accomplish so much? Elias crouched next to her, pointing to the channels. One species, one individual, can show what is possible. But understanding, application, and persistence make the difference. Humans endure because we observe, adapt, and innovate. These principles are universal. They work wherever scarcity exists. Sealer's voice carried across the council, firm and now tinged with reluctant admiration. Elias Ward, your survival and your teachings have reshaped Aridian. The drought that defined our civilization for centuries will end because of you. We acknowledge your species' ingenuity. It is time to integrate these methods fully. The council erupted with energy, Solari moving with purpose, spreading the techniques across the planet. Elias watched, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. His mission had begun as survival, then shifted into education and demonstration, and now he had catalyzed a transformation on a planetary scale. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dunes, water flowed steadily through the channels. Reservoirs, once dry, now brimmed with life-sustaining liquid. The air, though still dry, carried the faint scent of revitalized soil. For the first time in centuries, the Solari could drink freely, irrigate their crops efficiently, and look forward to a future not defined by scarcity. Sealer approached Elias one final time. You have done more than survive. You have shown what humans are capable of. Your presence here will be remembered for generations. Perhaps we misjudged your species entirely. Elias allowed himself a faint, satisfied smile. Humans endure, not because we are invincible, but because we refuse to accept impossibility. We analyze, adapt, and act. That is what you have witnessed. And now your civilization can thrive because you chose to observe, learn, and integrate that knowledge. Viral looked up at Elias, eyes bright with gratitude. Will humans return? Will your species continue to teach us? Perhaps, Elias said, rising to his full height. But knowledge is now in your hands. Humans can show possibilities, but it is your willingness to act that ensures survival. Remember this, the universe rewards those who learn, adapt, and innovate. Scarcity exists only where effort stops. The twin moons rose in the pale sky, casting silvery light across the rejuvenated desert. Small streams reflected the moon's glow, vegetation shimmered with new life, and the Solari population gathered to witness the change that one human had catalyzed. Elias turned, walking toward the transport that would carry him away from Aridian 9, leaving behind not just water, but a legacy of ingenuity, adaptation, and hope. The desert had been conquered, not by force, but by intellect, observation, and the relentless persistence that defined humanity. As the shuttle rose, the desert stretched below, alive in a way it never had. Humans had arrived as a fragile species, underestimated by the galaxy. Yet their actions had rewritten the possibilities for a civilization, proving once again that ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability could triumph over even the harshest worlds. For Aridian 9, the drought was over. For the galaxy, the underestimated humans had just begun to leave their mark.